Somewhere out on the grassland of Kansas or the Texas panhandle, a wheel would squeak, a triangle would ring, and 30 tired cowboys would drive what they were doing and come running. That sound meant the Chuckwagon had caught up to the herd, and dinner was close. No restaurant on earth ever earned the kind of loyalty that beat-up wooden wagon earned night after night for 3 straight months on the trail. We are about to walk through 25 mills that fed the men who pushed millions of cattle from Texas to the railheads of Kansas and beyond. Some of these dishes you already know by name. Most of them you have never heard of, because the world that made them disappeared with the open range itself. Here is the promise: by the time we reach the last plate, you will understand something bigger than food. You will understand how a cook with 1 iron pat, 1 sourdough crack, and whatever the wagon carried in its bit built an entire cuisine on the move, and why almost none of it survived in the modern kitchen. There were 3 reasons that world vanished. The barbed wire came and cut up the open range. The railroads reached farther west and shortened the drives. And refrigeration changed what a wagon needed to carry at all. Keep that in mind as we count down, because every dish on this list carries a little bit of that ending inside it. Hardtack, before the trail cook fired up his Dutch ovens, Hardtack rode in the wagon bit as insurance against a bad week. Flour, water, and salt baked herd as a shingle, meant to survive weeks without spoiling. Cowboys soaked it in coffee or bacon grease just to get a fork through it. It tasted like almost nothing, and that was the point. Hardtack was never meant to satisfy, only to keep a man upright until real food showed up again. Once better transport made stale bread unnecessary, hardtack disappeared almost overnight. Sow, belly and beans, salt pork, sliced thick and fried in its own fat, sat next to a pat of pinto beans that had simmered since sunrise. The smoke drifted low across the grass while the fat popped in the skillet. This was breakfast, lunch, and dinner on the hardest days, when there was no time for anything fancier. It kept a cowboy working 12 hours in the saddle without complaint. Once cattle drives shortened and fresher meat was easy to carry, sow belly's daily appearance faded in, an occasional trait. Chuckwagon cornbread baked in a blackened skillet set in the coals. This cornbread came out with a crust you could hear crack. The cook would grease the pan with bacon drippings, so the edges fried while the middle stayed soft as custard. Under an open sky at dusk, with the herd bedding down and the fire popping, that first bite of hot cornbread felt like a small mercy after a 14-hour day. Home ovens with even heat made the skillet feel primitive, and that specific char of open coals mostly disappeared. Prairie coffee, called belly wash by the men who drank gallons of it, this coffee was boiled strong enough to float. Hoarse, she then settled with a splash of cold water so the ground sank. The cook kept the pat on the coals from before dawn until the last man turned in. That bitter, smoky smell drifting across camp told every rider that morning had arrived, whether he liked it or not. Percolators and drip machines replaced the boiled pat, and the ritual of one shared coffee source thinned out with it. Fried salt pork gravy, when the fat rendered down from frying salt pork. The cook would toss in flour right there in the skillet and stir until it turned the color of saddle leather, then thin it with water or milk. Poured over biscuits, it turned a plain meal into something a tired man actually looked forward to. The grease and smoke smell clung to the whole camp for an hour after. As meals got lighter and more varied, this heavy, fat-forward gravy became memory rather than daily habit. Cowboy beans, pinto beans soaked over night in the chuckbacks, then cooked all day in a black pat over the fire with onion, salt pork, and whatever chili peppers the cook had on hand. By suppertime, they had gone soft and dark, thick enough to hold a spoon standing up. Men lined up with tin plates while the pat steamed in the cool evening air. Beans were cheap, filling, and easy to transport dry everything a trail outfit needed. Once shorter drives brought fresh vegetables within reach, they replaced the all-day bean pat as a daily staple. Skillet fried steak, tough cuts of beef pounded flat, dredged in flour, and fried hard in a cast iron skillet until the crust turned deep brown. The smell of frying beef fat would drift for a mile, pulling riders in from the fair edges of the herd before the bell even rang. As grilling took over the American plate, this pan-fried trail version gave way to fresher preparations. Red-eye gravy after frying ham or salt pork, the cook would splash strong black coffee straight into the hot skillet, scraping up the brown bits until it turned into a thin, dark, salty gravy. Poured over biscuits, it woke a man up faster than coffee alone ever could. It survives today mostly in the American South, but the rougher trail version faded once cooks had more ingredients to work with. Sourdough biscuits every Chuckwagon carried, sourdough crack, decades-old passed-down cook to cook like a family heirloom. Losing the starter was practically a firing offense. The cook would work the dough by lamplight, then bake round biscuits in a Dutch oven buried in hat, coals piled on the lid too, so they baked from both directions. Split open and slathered with molasses or gravy, they were the one guaranteed comfort on the whole trail. Commercial yeast made sourdough starters unnecessary, and that living crack disappeared from most kitchens. Son of a gun, nothing on the trail wasted more or tasted better than this, made from the odds and ends of a freshly butchered calf. Heart, liver, sweetbreads, marrow, gut, and tongue all simmered together with onions and whatever spices the wagon carried. The name got cleaned up for polite company, but everyone on the drive knew its real name. It smelled rich and strange, unlike anything served anywhere else. Modern butchering and refrigeration meant nobody needed to use every part of an animal at once anymore. Camp bread, when there was no time for a proper Dutch oven biscuit, the cook would twist plain dough around a green stick and hold it over open flame until it puffed and browned unevenly. Every man got a slightly different piece, some crisp, some doughy in the middle. But it meant something warm even when the rain never stopped. Once cooks had steady time and better ovens, this rushed bread mostly disappeared, remembered now only in campfire cookouts. Beef jerky strips of lean beef salted and hung to dry in the sun and wined, sometimes smoked lightly over a low fire, gave the outfit meat that would survive weeks without spoiling. Cowboys chewed it slow in the saddle, working it down like tobacco, getting hours of energy out of a few strips. Refrigerated rail cars and better preservation eventually made hand-drying meat on this scale a lost skill. Dutch oven peach cobbler, dried peaches, rehydrate in hot water folded int. A sweet batter and baked in the same iron pat that cooked everything else coals underneath and on the lid both. On a good night, this cobbler was the closest thing to dessert most cowboys saw for months at a time. The smell of cinnamon and peach cutting through woods, smoke stuck with men for the rest of their lives. Fresh frid availability eventually made dried frid cobbler a special occasion rather than a trail staple. Boiled rice and raisins called spatted pup by the men who ate it, this simple pat of rice sweetened with raisins and a little sugar gave the cook an easy cheap dessert that traveled well in dry form. It was sweet filling and neat. It almost no skill after a long day of cooking everything else. As sugar and dried frid became every-day grocery items rather than trail rarities, this dish lost its special campfire meaning. Fried prairie chicken, when a rider had time to hunt, wild prairie chicken went straight in. The skillet dredged in flour and fried crisp in bacon fat. The smell of wild game frying at dusk was different from beef lighter, gamier a welcome break from weeks of cattle meat. Getting fresh game meant somebody had ridden out and gotten lucky, so this meal always felt like a reward. As wild game thinned and ranching settled down, fried prairie chicken became a rare treat rather than a trail option. Vinegar pie, When no fresh fruit was available for miles, a resourceful cook could still make something that tasted sweet and tart using vinegar, sugar, butter, and flour baked into a simple crust. It was a trick born from having almost nothing to work with, and it worked surprisingly well. Once grocery access improved along established cattle trails, this improvised pie disappeared, a clever solution, no, but he needed once real frit came back. Chili con carne trail style, long before it became a stadium, food chili was trail, food beef dried chilies, and whatever spices the cook carried simmered low and slow in the big pat for hours. The smell rolled across camp on cold nights and pulled every rider in early. It was hearty spicy enough to wake a tired man up, and endlessly adaptable to whatever the wagon carried that week. As chili moved into American cities and got standardized, this rougher trail version mostly disappeared into legend. Buffalo gravy and biscuits in the earliest days of the cattle trails, before the great herds were hunted to near extinction, buffalo meat sometimes made it in camp, and its rich, dark drippings turned into a gravy unlike anything made from beef or pork. Poured over biscuits under a wide open sky, it tasted like the plains themselves. As buffalo vanished from the range within a couple of decades, this specific gravy vanished right along with them. Fried mush, leftover corn, mill mush from breakfast, chilled over, night in a pan, sliced thick and fried crisp the next morning in bacon grease. Nothing on the trail went to waste, and this was proof of it. The crackle of the fry pan at first light, with the herd stirring and the sky just turning gray, meant the day was starting whether anyone felt ready or not. As breakfast habits shifted toward eggs, bacon, and toast in American diners, this proposed waste-nothing cornmeal dish slipped out of the daily rotation almost entirely. Son of a bitch in a sack, a boiled sit pudding studded with raisins wrapped and cooked in a cloth sack dropped right into a pat of boiling water. This dessert took its name from cowboys with a dark sense of humor about trail food. Sliced and served with a splash of whiskey or sweet sauce, it was heavy sweet, and exactly what tired muscles wanted after supper. Steamed puddings faded from American kitchens, generally as baking ovens became standard, and this trail-specific version faded right along with the broader tradition. Antelope steaks, when cattle were the job but not always the only meat around hunted antelope, gave the outfit a lean, fast-cooking alternative, seared hot and fast in the skillet, seasoned simply with salt and whatever pepper the wagon carried. The meat cooked quick over high coals, filling camp with a sharper, wilder smell than beef ever had. It broke up the monotony of weeks eating the same cuts night after night. As antelope populations dropped and hunting became more regulated, this occasional trail luxury disappeared from the American plate almost entirely. Dried apple stack cake, layers of spiced cake or sometimes just spiced biscuit dough, stacked with a filling of refrigerated dried apples cooked down thick and sweet, built up like a tower over several hours near the fire. It traveled well and improved with a day's rest, which made it perfect for a wagon on the move for months. Families later carried this recipe off the trail and into home kitchens across the rural South and West. Even so, the specific campfire-built version mostly disappeared once home ovens became standard. Sonofagan stew, the refined version later in the era, as outfits get a little more organized and cooks carried better spice, is the rough Oregon meat stew got refined into something with more seasoning, more care, and a thicker broth, still using the whole animal but treat it with more pride than the earliest rushed versions. It marked a turning point where trail cooking started borrowing techniques from town kitchens. Once refrigerated meat delivery reached ranch country, nobody needed this resourceful whole animal approach any more, and it faded from daily use within a generation. Camp coffee cake, on rare mornings when the outfit had extra sugar and a little cream, the cook would surprise the men with a simple coffee cake, baked in the Dutch oven sweet dense, and gone within minutes of coming off the coals. It was never planned in advance, just a good cook, using a good morning to lift everyone's spirits before a long day in the saddle. Word of a coffee cake morning could turn a grumbling camp cheerful in minutes. As trail life ended and ranch cooks worked from fixed kitchens, this occasional surprise treat lost its specific magic entirely. Sunday beef roast on the one day of the week outfits tried to slow down if the trail allowed it. The cook would take the best cut available and slow roast it low in the Dutch oven for hours, filling camp with a smell so different from the daily fried and boiled meals that men would talk about it for days afterward. It was the closest thing to a real Sunday dinner most cowboys got for 3 straight months, a small taste of home life carried out on the open range. When the cattle drives ended and ranch families settled in permanent homes with real ovens and real Sundays, this once-a-week trail luxury became simply what regular life looked like again. That is the whole list. 25 meals built out of flour, salt, pork, wild game, and whatever a cook could carry across 1,000 miles of open grassland. None of it survived by accident. It survived because somewhere a family remembered. Recipe there grand. Father ate under open stars and decided it was worth writing down before it disappeared completely, the same way we just did. If this took you back to a time ye never even lived through, hit like and subscribe so we can keep bringing that forgotten America back to life.